What kind of action can the Fed take?
Well, number one, we can do research. And we have a lot of really smart economists at the Fed. And again, we're looking at some of these issues already. For example, I think education is one factor. Educational disparity is one factor leading to the structural higher unemployment for blacks versus whites. And by the way, the Minneapolis Fed has done a lot of work, for example, in early childhood education, and has been a real leader in that. And that's now being implemented in the state of Minnesota, which I think is a very positive step. So one, we can do research. As we better understand the problems, then we can see, does monetary policy have a role to play in solving it? Now, I will say, the Fed's overall mission of stable prices and maximum employment, achieving those goals is good for all Americans. That's good for black Americans, that's good for white Americans. So if we do our jobs, that's good for everybody, but that by itself may not be enough. And then there may be things that Congress then needs to do. If we can better understand the problem, we can better diagnose and identify who has the tools to solve it. The answer is I don't know yet. This is an area that needs a lot more research to really understand why is there this structural gap. It's usually around 2x, white to black to white unemployment is usually 2 times good economy and bad. So this is an area where I think we need to do a lot more work to understand what are the structural factors. And then we can figure out, does the Fed have tools? More likely it's Congress. But at a start, we need to do more analysis and research. And I think the Fed can make a contribution there.
This is a unique action among the 12 Fed districts?
You mean this meeting?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think my guess is other Fed districts have had meetings with different community organizations. I know we in Minneapolis want to engage in every way that we can with the broadest set of our constituents as possible. So I'm very pleased to be here. And as they mentioned, this is the beginning. This is not simply one meeting and then we're done.
What's the short-term action that you can expect?
Well, we made some commitments about some further research that we want to do, some collaboration with NOC that we want to pursue, in addition to the meeting with some of their sister organizations at Jackson Hole. So there are some specific tangibles. But more broadly, I'm working very closely with our research staff to understand, why are there these big gaps in Minnesota? Minnesota has a lot going for it. A lot of things are really positive, but why are there these big gaps? I haven't gotten good answers to that yet. We need to understand the why before we can design potential solutions.
Does the meeting give you any more confidence or any less confidence that Neel and the Federal Reserve in general can do anything about the disparities between blacks and whites?
Yeah, I mean, it does in the sense that, first of all, we know very little about the Fed. Meetings like this are hugely important, not just for me or staff, but for regular community folks to figure out what goes on at this building downtown, this big, black, shadowy building that we often drive by and walk by, and most of us know absolutely nothing about it. So just untangling the wires of what actually happens at the Fed, what can the Fed do, what is the responsibility of the Fed versus Congress versus other institutions is a big deal. So some of the research and data that offer to collaborate on, for example, in the meeting it came up, the disparities between black unemployment and white unemployment are pretty consistent. So in good times there's a gap in unemployment, and in bad times there's a gap. So now we have a particular thing that we can spend more time collaborating, doing a deeper dive and figure out what are the structural barriers, and then what can the Fed do to bridge that gap. That's a big deal and a big starting point.
When you talk about the Fed and their relationship to economy, and we're right here, we have General Mills on this side of us, Target on this side of us. What kind of policies can the Fed affect when really the hiring decision is up to those corporations?
Oh, you're right. So we can't affect an individual corporation and who they decide to hire. But the Fed does have influence on the overall strength of the economy. And if we can have a growing U.S. economy where businesses in all sectors are hopefully hiring, then that's better for all workers, be they white, black, brown. One of the things I learned in 2008 is you don't tackle a crisis with incremental solutions. You tackle a crisis with overwhelming force. And so if this is a crisis, and I think certainly parts of this are, then we need to bring overwhelming force.
Could you give us a little bit of your background? What were you doing before you assumed this job? Are you a long-time Fed
No, so I'm new to the Fed. I joined January 1st. Prior to this, I was in California. Most recently, I had run for governor of California. Before that, I worked in the private sector and also spent 3 years in Washington in the U.S. Treasury Department tackling the financial crisis. earlier yet, I was an aerospace engineer, so I've done a number of different things.
You haven't decided what you want to do when you grow up?
Exactly.